Just wanted to welcome everyone to tonight's program. First of all, I wanted to thank all of the shuls for co-sponsoring this with the Kollel, make it a real community-wide event. I think there's really one thing that the whole night is about, and that's what we call Kavod Torah, which means honoring the Torah. Because Rabbi Kanievsky represented honoring Torah. That's what his whole life was. His whole life was about Torah. So honoring him is honoring the Torah. So the program is, Rabbi Morris is going to share with us some words, and then we're going to have a video from Rabbi Sherman. And I hope everyone takes it as a way of increasing their respect for Torah and their commitment to Torah and their passion for Torah. So without further ado, Rabbi Morris.
Good evening, everybody. As Rabbi Zuckerman mentioned, we're here tonight to reflect on the life of a Gadol b'Yisrael, someone who was recognized by every Jewishly educated person in the world as the most preeminent Torah scholar of our time. Now, when a Gadol b'Torah passes, so there are two objectives on reflecting on his life. One is to appreciate the loss, and one is to learn from his life. So Nisan is not the time to appreciate the loss. Hesped is forbidden during Nisan, but we must take the time, even during Nisan, to learn from his life, and that's what tonight is about. You know, when hearing stories about Reb Chaim and other larger-than-life Gedolim, I tend to think to myself, what can I learn from this person's righteousness and scholarship? Can I live up to even the toenails of what he did? And if I can't, so then how can I learn constructively from his life? The Chazon Ish, the Chazon Ish, who occupied within the Jewish people in the 30s, 40s, and early 50s, probably around the same place that Reb Chaim did during our generation. So there are many books and stories written about his life. And I have a colleague who notes, ruefully, the Chazon Ish didn't become the Chazon Ish by reading stories about the Chazon Ish. So what is the purpose? What can we gain from gathering here and hearing stories and Maisim and Maisei Gadlus from Reb Chaim? Let me perhaps take a few examples to demonstrate the difficulty that I have with it, and then let's come together and see. I think that it really has a very powerful message. There's a story that I heard many decades ago. I can't attest to its veracity 100%, but again, they don't tell stories like this about you and me. The story, according to the way the story goes, so Reb Chaim's father was also a Gadol b'Yisrael, a Steipler Rav. Reb Chaim's uncle was in fact the Chazon Ish. So according to this story, when Reb Chaim was 13, when he was bar mitzvah, so the Steipler took his son to the Chazon Ish, to the Gadol b'Torah of the time, and he said, here's my son, I want to give him a proper Torah chinuch. What's a proper Torah chinuch for Chaim? So the Chazon Ish said, this is what you do. You learn with him, have him learn 7 blot a day for 5 years. It is 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, until his 18th birthday. So he'll finish Shas once a year for 5 years. That's his program for his adolescence. So Reb Chaim starts on the program. Right, goes a month, tells his father, I can't. And I'll tell you, I didn't know this, but I heard from Rabbi Hoffer, a Gadol b'Torah in his own right, in one of his Hespedim, that Reb Chaim was not an Eli. There were some Gedolim over the years that were tremendous geniuses. You think back to the Vilna Gaon, you think to Rabbi Akiva. Even in our generation, my Rosh Yeshiva had a photographic memory. He was known for photographic memory. Rav Moshe was a genius. Many, many geniuses. Rabbi Hafer mentioned his husband that Reb Chaim wasn't known to be, he was very bright obviously, but he wasn't known to have a photographic memory. He's going through, and he says, I can't do it. Tati, I can't do it. So what does the stipler say to him? So, Chazon Ish says, you do it, you know. Finally he muddles through the first year. He said, it's a waste of time. I can't. Well, it's too bad. The Chazon Ish says, you're going to do it. You're going to do it. And so it went for 5 years. And then at the end of the 5 years, Reb Chaim tells his father, it's all come together. Now I'm Mamish Shas. I can't even remember Gemaras at a Daf Yomi pace, right? What do I take out of that story? What's the purpose of my hearing that story? I want to take another example. I heard this from Reb Chaim. It was the Levaya of Reb Chaim was live streamed. I tuned into that live stream, and I heard the following story from his son, one of his sons at the Levaya. He said there was a period of time where Reb Chaim was giving a shir. I don't know if it was a daily shir or a weekly shir, but he was giving a shir in Yerushalmi. And he went through all of Seder Zrayim, which is about 20% of Shas Yerushalmi. And then he went through Masechta Shabbos, and then he announced that he's going to stop. And so his sons asked him, you've been doing this for so long, people are depending on you, why are you stopping the shir? So he said, I don't have time to prepare anymore. So he said, how long does it take you to prepare the shir? He said, 5 minutes. He didn't have his own learning schedule, was not soivel. He didn't have the 5 minutes to prepare the shir. What does that say to me? That level of time management, that level of chashivas for time. It was known, I never was zocha to meet Reb Chaim. It could be some people in this room were, I don't know, but I never went to him for a bracha. But it was known that people would go to him, he would give brachas, people would wait, right? He would have an hour or two where he was open to give a bracha, to give a tefillah, and people would go and they would say their tzaris, and he would answer them in his later years, he would answer him buha, right? What does buha mean? So buha is a Hebrew contraction for bracha of hatzlacha, blessing and success. Okay, why did he say buha? It was a time-saving mechanism, so he wouldn't have to say bracha of hatzlacha. Now, Rav Moshe Heinemann, who was also masbid Reb Chaim, he made the following calculation. He said, let's say on an average day, 100 people were able to go through Reb Chaim's doors, right? If you make the cheshire, so he did a test. What's the difference in time it takes to say buha or to say bracha of hatzlacha? So Reb Heinemann calculated is 1 second difference, right? So if 100 people went through his door, that means that there was 100 seconds, he saved 100 seconds by saying buha, okay? That's 100 seconds is 1 minute and 40 seconds. He gained 1 minute and 40 seconds, right? He came up with this contraction in order to be able to save that amount of time so that he'd have 1 hour and 40 minutes extra per day to be able to learn. So again, what does that say to me, right? Am I really able to aspire to that level of time management, to that level for chashivas of time? What do I learn from that? What's the purpose of hearing this story? So I think that the answer is, or at least the answer that I would like to suggest, is that we're not reflecting on Reb Chaim's life in order to learn how to become a gadol. There's no curriculum, there's no career track, there's no Ivy League yeshiva that will train you and guarantee you're becoming a gadol. To become a gadol, there's a unique mix of kedusha, focus, hasmada, mesiras nefesh certainly, siyata dishmaya certainly. To become a gadol, that's something that happens to a relatively few number of people. But what we can learn from Reb Chaim and other gedolei Torah is not how to become a gadol, but how to achieve godless, how to actualize the potential of godless within ourselves. But let's take the stories until this point. Okay, so when we think about the story with Chazon Ish, that Chazon Ish went through Shas 5 times between ages 13 and 18, right? So are we really to focus on how much Reb Chaim was capable of learning as a teen? I think certainly for me, that's a waste of time. It's counterproductive, it'll bring a chalishas adas. That's not the point. It's not really relevant at all. But what is relevant to me from that story, what I could take away from that story, is during those 5 years following the Chazon Ish's curriculum, right, when Reb Chaim was trying, it's too hard, especially at the beginning. And still, he was receptive to mentoring. Even as a teen, right? Some teams are very receptive to mentoring. A lot of teams are not so receptive to mentoring. And if you think it's only teens and not 30-year-olds and 40-year-olds and 50-year-olds, none of us are really receptive to mentoring that. We all think we know it, right? And Reb Chaim would have had a right to think that he knows it, given who he was. But he was receptive to mentoring. He was certainly had an open mind to hadracha from the Gadol Hador, from his rebbeim, from his father. I think that's something very productive and constructive that we could incorporate into our mindset if we're willing to do it. Okay? Maybe we can't schedule our lives down to the second. Okay? But we could learn the chashivas of time. We could learn about respecting our own time. We could learn about respecting the times of our chavrusas, the times of the tzibur, the times of other people who depend on us. That's definitely something that we could learn for Reb Chaim. Okay? There's an interesting story. It's an interesting story. I heard this from Rabbi Aaron Feldman during his hesped of Reb Chaim. Rabbi Aaron Feldman, who's the current Rosh Yeshiva of Ner Yisrael, actually learned with Reb Chaim for a number of years, but Chavrusas, he's a few years younger than Reb Chaim. They were Chavrusas for a while. And because of his relationship, there was a philanthropist who wanted to open up a kollel that would be successful in Eretz Yisrael. And he thought, this is when Reb Chaim was in his 30s, he thought if I could get Rabbi Kanievsky, he's a great Baki, the son of the Stipler, so that'll be a successful kollel. So he sent Rabbi Aaron Feldman on a shlichus. Rabbi Aaron sent another person, another shliach, right? And the shlichus was to make this offer to Reb Chaim, that be taken care of for life, right? Open up a kollel, you can learn all the time. His parnasa was very, very bedachkus at that time. He had a very hard time making a living. Actually, he didn't make a living at all. His wife worked to support him so that he'd be able to learn 24/7. His wife was a bookkeeper, and their mishpacha was growing. He definitely could have used the parnasa. And he gave him the opportunity to become a Rosh Kollel for a very long tenure. And when Reb Chaim heard the offer, he just laughed. And he said, "You think I'm going to give up my Chidushei Torah in order to become a Rosh Kollel?" Now, that's not necessarily, he gave up a career, he gave up a whole parnasa in order, because of the chashivas he had for his own learning, right? Because of the dedication he had to his own learning. Well, hey man, I'm certainly not somebody who gave up the opportunity to become a Rosh Kollel in order to learn more. I didn't do that. And I don't think most of us are on the darga, on the level that we would give up a whole career in terms of our learning. But what about foregoing the possibility of one extra deal in order that we could get to our time that's kavua in Torah, to our Seder kavua, to give up the possibility of one deal, to let one phone call slide so that I'll be at Seder on time, right? Or to spend another $50, $100 on a flight so that I won't stand up my chavrusa. That's something that we could learn from Reb Chaim's life. And I would say, in addition to this, and I think this is really the most important thing, this is really, when I realized this, it so amazed me, right? That the idea that Gedolei Torah they have a different set of priorities than we have entirely. And the amazing example, if you put the stories that we discussed tonight, you put them together. So think about it, there's something amazing over here. Reb Chaim was a person who he developed a contraction in order to save 1.5 minutes a day. Okay, he canceled a share to get in an extra 5 minutes of learning. And he gave up the chance to be a Rosh Kollel, whatever that's worth, right? But he gave up that chance in order to maximize his own learning. And yet, he allowed people, he had an open door policy in his house for an hour or two a day to help people who sought his brachos, who sought his advice, and he really cared about him. You know what he could have done? He could have said, my house is open for 1 hour, and whoever could get in, and whoever can't get in, come back tomorrow, come back tomorrow, come back tomorrow, come back to the doctors that do that, right? Come back tomorrow. He didn't do that. He came up with a contraction of buha instead of bracha v'hatzlacha, so that the maximum number of people, so instead of saying 50 people a day, he could say 100 people a day. He opened up and he really cared about helping those yidden. And helping those yidden were more important than the minute and a half, than the 5 minutes, than the whole hour of learning, as much as he was much of his learning. But he taught us that certainly being a gadol Torah, and maybe even being a ben Torah, means that we have to care about our yidden. We need to care about every person, and these were very pashta people, right? They weren't only his colleagues who were coming, there were people from all walks of life. So, in short, if we distill the inspiring stories that I shared with you, and I'm sure there will be more inspiring stories from Rabbi Sherman, who actually knew Reb Chaim, I think we could have pathways to actualize our own godless. The chashivas for time, and being cognizant of time, our own time and other people's time. Chashivas of our own learning. The importance of having hadracha, of having a mentor in Torah, and being open to taking the advice of that mentor. Caring about others as being part and parcel of our avodas Hashem. So, it's time to tune in now to Rav Nosson Sherman Shlita, who actually knew Reb Chaim, and I'm sure that he has much more to share than I do. Remember, we're never going to become Reb Chaim, but we can, and we're mechuyev, to use the story of his life as a hisarus to actualize our own godless.
Reb Aaron Kotler said a hesped for the Chazon Ish, Secher Tzadikim Livrocha. And what he said about the Chazon Ish really applies to Reb Chaim as well. Reb Aaron asked, people came to the Chazon Ish, business questions, health questions, all sorts of things, personality problems. He never had any training in these things. He had no PhD in finance or in education or in anything else. And yet, people came to him and he responded, and he was right. How did it happen? And Reb Aaron said there's a Masorah from the Vilna Gaon that if you have a problem, you don't know what to do. The Gaon said, learn Torah. At some point, it may be 20 minutes or maybe it may take 2 hours. At some point, you'll feel that you're learning Lishma. And then think about your problem. And whatever comes into your mind then, that's what you should do. And Reb Aaron said, the Chazon Ish learned Torah Lishma 24/7. Every waking moment, he was learning Torah Lishma. So whenever people came to him, he could give them an answer. And he had the help of the Rabbanu Shloim in giving him that answer. And the same thing applied to Rabbi Kanievsky, Zecher Tzadik V'Kodesh Livrocha. Every moment of every day, he was learning Lishma. And therefore, he had Siyata D'Shmaya to give the proper answer. But what did it mean to us? How many of us actually went to ask him for a bracha or for the solution to a problem? Of the nearly 1 million people who came to his levaya, how many of them had ever gone to him, had ever been close to him, had even seen him? What did he mean to us? Well, let me tell you a story from Tanakh. Eliyahu Hanavi, as we all know, was taken to Shemayim. Alive, he was taken up to heaven. And HaKadosh Baruch Hu told him, go across the Yarden, and that's where it will happen. That's where you will ascend. And his Talmud, Elisha, went with him. Eliyahu said, you don't have to come, don't come. He said, no, I will not leave you. And on their way, they come to the town of Beisel. And B'nai HaNevi'im, young Nevi'im, students, Talmidim of the Nevi'im, who were developing, you could call them Novi in training. They came to Elisha, and they said to him, Hayadato ki hayom Hashem lekeach es adonecha me'olecha. Do you know that today HaKadosh Baruch Hu will take your master from you? And Elisha said, Yadati, I know. Hecheshu, be quiet. I know all about it. Don't talk about it. They continued. They came to Yericho. And again, Elisha is approached by a group of B'nai HaNevi'im, and they say the same thing. Hayodata, do you know that Hayom Hashem Alekecha Lekeach es Adonecha Me'olecha? Do you know that Kadosh Baruch Hu is taking your master away from you today? And he said, yes, I know. Quiet, don't talk about it. They crossed the Yarden. Eliyahu and Elisha crossed the Yarden. And there's a fiery chariot, fiery horses, and they lift Eliyahu up to heaven. And Elisha comes back across the Yarden. And these B'nai HaNevi'im come to him and say, where is Eliyahu? We're going to look for him. And the Pasuk says, the Pasuk in Malachim Beis, Kapitel Beis, tells us that 50 people went across the Yarden. They spent 3 days searching for Eliyahu, and they couldn't find him. The question is obvious. What were they thinking? These were the same people who told Elisha, HaKadosh Baruch Hu is taking Eliyahu away from you. Why are they searching for him? 3 days, 50 people, 3 days searching? They themselves had said the answer before. HaKadosh Baruch Hu is taking Eliyahu away from you. Why are they searching? Rashi, Abarbanel, Malbim all say essentially the same explanation. As long as Eliyahu was there, there was a spirit of holiness. It elevated everybody around him. It elevated the country. It elevated the world. They could be Nevi'im, young Nevi'im, but they could experience prophecy. When Eliyahu was gone, his spirit was gone, his influence was gone, and all of them were diminished. Everyone was diminished because Eliyahu had been taken away. Reb Chaim is not here. We're all diminished. But you have to have a certain sensitivity to understand that, to feel it. Can a blind person appreciate the sunrise? Can a deaf person appreciate a Mozart Sinigin or a Beethoven symphony? There was a famous pathologist who lived about 100 years ago or more, Pascal, and he said, I have done 10,000 autopsies and I have never found a soul. Of course he didn't find the soul. He had no connection to the soul. He had no connection to neshama. He had no connection to anything higher. He had no connection to anybody like a Rabbi Kanievsky. Just imagine, you're describing the greatest basketball player in the world. I don't know who it is, but you know who it is. The greatest basketball player in the world. And you're talking about his greatness, and you're saying, he has such beautiful tattoos. Wonderful tattoos, so colorful. That's what makes him a great basketball player? Because he has tattoos? The secular press had obituaries about Reb Chaim. The New York Times said that Reb Chaim's was respected greatness because in the beginning of the pandemic, the COVID pandemic, Reb Chaim said the yeshivas should remain open because Torah is a greater protection than lockdowns. And then Reb Chaim, when he saw the situation, he changed and he said the yeshivas should close and people should get vaccinated. They're reducing one of the great, holiest people of our age, reducing him to someone who can affect public opinion. When Rav Shach Zichrono Livrocha was nifter, the paper said he controlled a certain percentage of the electorate of the state of Israel, and he could determine who the next prime minister would be. And it was because of him that Netanyahu became prime minister. You're reducing a great Rosh Hashiva, a great tzaddik, a great goen. You're reducing him to a politician, a manipulator of public opinion, someone who should have been on Madison's Avenue. Reb Chaim was much more than that. Reb Chaim was much more than that. When he was taken away, Elisha said, Ovi, Ovi, Rechav Yisrael Ufaroshav, my father, my Rebbe, the chariot, the warrior of the Jewish people. And the Targum explains, the tefillah of Eliyahu Hanavi was more powerful than an army. And that's what preserved, that's what saved the Jewish people. Reb Chaim was here. That's what he was. You know, the Brisker Rov, Zichrono Livrocha, said about the Chazon Ish when he passed away. And what he said about the Chazon Ish applies equally to Reb Chaim. The Brisker Rov, great Goen. The Brisker Rov said, until now, there was a world with the Chazon Ish. And now it's a world without the Chazon Ish. The world has become diminished. The world has fallen. To what degree, who knows? But the world has fallen. Until now, it was a world with Reb Chaim. And now it's a world without Reb Chaim. And we're all diminished. Whether we ever saw him, whether we ever spoke to him, whether we were ever blessed by him, we're all diminished. Klal Yisrael is diminished. His tefillah, he would say, Bracha v'hatzlocha, 2 words. And then he shortened it. He began to saying Vuha, the abbreviation of Bracha v'hatzlocha. And people ask him, why? Why do you reduce the bracha to 2 words? It certainly was not lacking in sincerity. Because I know people who were close to him. I know people who went to him year after year with all their problems. And when they left him, they were elevated. He was concerned. And if he expressed his concern in 2 words, it was not because his concern was any less. He felt it. And somebody asked him, why doesn't he give a more fulsome bracha? And he said, every second is precious. Every second that he would spend in uttering a sentence or 2 or a paragraph of a bracha would take away time from learning. And learning was his whole life. Reb Chaim said he envies Reb Zundel Kreuzer. Reb Zundel Kreuzer was a goen and a tzaddik in Yerushalayim. And Reb Chaim said, Reb Zundel knows everything that I know, but HaKadosh Baruch Hu loves him. He spared him from the burden of having hundreds and thousands of people coming to him constantly. And Reb Chaim said he himself was not spared from that burden, but he welcomed the burden because he was a servant of the Rebbeinu Shel Olam and a servant of Klal Yisrael. And if Klal Yisrael needed him, if people needed his bracha, he was there. He was there to listen to their problem, to understand their problem, to give them the bracha that they needed, the encouragement that they needed. And more often than not, his bracha would come true. It would happen. So many stories. I mean, there's no point in my going through these stories now. Yated has it, Amodia has it, Mishpacha has it, Ami has it. Read them, and get an inkling of the greatness of this tzaddik who lived among us. But what can we do? Reb Chaim made us see him every single year. Bavli, Yerushalmi, Shulchan Aruch, Mechilta, Medrash, name it, Kol Tzara Kula, every year. There's Rav Hartman, who has it written and is still writing classic works on Maharal. And he explains the Maharal, and he gives footnotes, and he gives sources. He once met Reb Chaim. Reb Chaim was younger. He was able to take a walk every day, doctor's orders. And Rabbi Hartman once met Reb Chaim, and he said, there's a quote in the Maharal, I can't find the source. And he told him what the Maharal says. Maharal says it's a chazal. I can't find it. Reb Chaim thought, it's not in Bavli. It's not in Yerushalmi. It's not in Medrash. It's not in Mechilta. It's a Zohar. Can you imagine that? Man, in a matter of seconds, Kala Tarakula is coursing through his mind. Not in Bavli, not in Yerushalmi, not in Medrash, not in Mechilta. It's a Zohar. Can we aspire to that? Obviously not. But to the other aspect of Reb Chaim, we can aspire. The tefillah, the attachment to the Rebbeinu Shalom, the concern for every Jew, the ability to distinguish between what's important and what's not important. And what's not important is what most people spend their lives striving for. We know that. But let's live it. Let me close with a story about the Sfas Emes. The Sfas Emes was a grandson of the Chidushei Harim. The Chidushei Harim's son died in his middle 30s, and so the heir of the Chidushei Harim would be the Sfas Emes. Sfas Emes was only 19 years old when his grandfather died. And the Hasidim, the Gerech Hasidim, wanted him to become Rebbe. He felt he's too young, he's not worthy. He left. He went away from Ger, and he went to the Alexander Rebbe. And he was there for about 4 years. The Gerech Hasidim prevailed upon him to come back and to lead them. And at the first Tish, he said, nobody, no human being can replace my grandfather. But all of us together can replace him. Let's work together, let's daven together, let's learn together, let's care about one another, let's help one another, let's be concerned with one another, let's have sensitivity to others. Rabbi Sai, I can't replace Reb Chaim. I doubt that there's anybody watching this who can replace Reb Chaim. We all know, nobody can. But we can learn from his rachmanis, his sensitivity, his faith. We can all elevate ourselves, and the process will elevate Klal Yisrael. And if we can elevate Klal Yisrael, then we can merit the coming of Mashiach Tzidkenu in Herav Yameinu. Amen. U'bilam ovos lanetzach, Moch Hashem Elokim Dimo Me'al Kol Ponim, V'cherpas Ama Yosir.